saying specifically that the context was driving his answer. It wasn't about the campaign. Will that hold up? Let's discuss with Republican Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma. Does that put it to bed for you, our Congressman, what you just heard from Jeff Sessions?
It absolutely does. Look, I think the hysteria and the desperation here on the part of Democrats is almost laughable. The idea that somehow Jeff Sessions was conspiring with the Russians to impact the election is just simply an unbelievable fiction. So, yeah, I think it's pretty much a tempest in a teapot.
Well, let's not get ahead of the implications, right? Because sometimes that makes it easier to dismiss the shorter questions, which is, he was asked a question about whether he had any contact with Russian officials, and he said no twice. That's not true. That means nothing to you?
No, it doesn't, frankly. I think he understood that question to be, did you talk to somebody about the campaign? Look, it's not unusual for United States senators or even congressmen, lowly congressmen, to meet with ambassadors. I do it all the time. We don't usually talk about anything to deal with campaigns. We usually talk about the relations between our respective countries or some requests they have. So I don't find this unusual in any way. And what strikes me as unusual is the manner in which Democrats seize on this. Look, if they want to figure out why they lost the election, they need to look in the mirror. They nominated a flawed candidate who ran a bad campaign. That's pretty much why you lose most elections in America.
I think that's a little bit of a distraction at this point, though, don't you? I mean, this is about what happened during his confirmation process. I think if you wanted to go broader context, I don't know that you go to the election unless you want to go to the hacking. And that's the concern, right, is that you have the intelligence community conclusion that, you know, your party does seem to want to run away from as quickly as it can. But isn't that matter? Doesn't it matter to you that you know the extent of any contacts between our government and whatever Russian activities led to the hacking?
Well, first of all, on the hacking issue, I'm quite content to have any investigation anybody wants to have. Look, other countries try to impact what happens in the United States. Quite frankly, we try to impact what happens in other countries. So that's not unusual. I mean, the first interference in an American election was in the 1790s by the French government. So that's sort of normal. The real question here, did it have any impact on the election? No. Now, do we want to know what the Russians are up to? Of course we do. But to suggest that in any way somehow Senator Sessions was involved in manipulating the election or in some way in some inappropriate contact with Russia, look, I'd have to see a lot more than what we've seen. And frankly, just as an old political guy, I would tell my friends on the other side of the aisle, you want to figure out why about the election, again, start looking at your own campaign, your own candidate. You'll figure out why you lost pretty quickly.
But don't you think, so you think that there's no curiosity in why he didn't answer this? You said a lot of people meet with the Russian ambassador. Have you?
No, I've not. Well, I met with him in a green room once, actually.
So no, not really.
But in my office, no.
Okay.
But do I meet with ambassadors on a regular basis? Absolutely. I have dinners at embassies.
Right, but not the Russian ambassador. And the reason I ask is that Claire McCaskill, who's on that same committee with Sessions, also says she never met with the Russian ambassador, let alone alone in her office in a private meeting.
She's also in a minority party. Maybe you'd like to talk to somebody in the majority. Look, it's who they meet with. The real question here, was there any impact on the election? Did Senator Sessions do anything improper? No, he didn't. If he misspoke, he should issue a clarification. But frankly, I think he took the question to mean if you talked to the Russians about the campaign, and I think he probably responded appropriately when he said no.
I think this is
there's some confusion here. I think that's all there is confusion. I don't see anything sinister.
There's certainly confusion. I don't think that's speculative at all, because he gave an answer that was fundamentally inaccurate. But to your question and to your suggestion, if the Attorney General knew that there was a meaningful distinction between a meeting he might have had as a senator on a certain committee and as a Trump surrogate, don't you think he would have pointed that out? Don't you think he would have said, yes, I did meet with this person twice, but it was in this capacity, not in this capacity?
You know, I think he probably, in retrospect, would like to have said that. But the real question here, look, you do lots of meetings. The schedule is pretty packed. I just don't see this as that significant. And again, if the implication is that somehow this is why, quote, the Democrats lost the election, and I think that is the implication, it's not.
I think it's as much of a defense mechanism right now as it is a justification by the Democrats, because every time any question comes up about telling the truth, you guys say the election's over. I think everyone should accept that at this point. But you do have this other context. If you want to talk politics, lying under oath was sure a big interest for you when it involved
I don't
Hillary
think
Clinton.
he lied under oath. I think he probably wasn't as clear in his answer as he should have been. Particularly given the fact that we have this sort of hysteria on the part of our friends on the other side of the aisle.
So you think all questions
look,
about Russian intervention are hysteria?
No, I think I actually said earlier, if you go back and rerun the tape, I think an investigation's appropriate. Do I think they had any impact on the election? Absolutely not.
All right, but that's your conclusion. It doesn't mean you shouldn't ask the questions. What's the hysteria?
Bob, the question's fine to ask.
What's the hysteria?
The hysteria here is a lot of my friends somehow believe the Russians managed to manipulate the election, and somehow, President Trump is sort of a Manchurian candidate to mix China with Russia. But that's just, it's just not what happened.
But what does that have to do with what happens with Sessions? We just had Sessions not answer questions accurately. That's the extent of the inquiry right now.
If this is the biggest inaccuracy they can find in hours of testimony under oath, I think it's just laughable. Look, I think the guy probably sits there for 8 or 9 hours, answers multiple questions, maybe made a mistake here, either didn't recall or wasn't clear. I just don't see a plot here. I don't think this is very sinister. Now, again, if my friends want to chase this particular rabbit, so be it, and that's fine. But I don't think it's going to get them any closer to the truth as to why they lost the election. And I think when they begin to think about that, it'll actually help them if they're analytical as opposed to hysterical, and I think they are hysterical.
I just think it's so interesting that you say you see a legitimate interest in finding out the extent of the Russian hacking efforts, and yet every time I'm trying to ask you about whether or not any of this is relevant to that discussion, you go to the election. I just want to draw your attention to one more thing. The second conversation between Sessions, according to the Washington Post, and this Russian official happened in September in private in Jeff Sessions' office. Both meetings, one which you could excuse as just coincidence at the convention, happened after the U.S. intel officials disclosed that Russia was attempting to interfere in the election. Why wouldn't Sessions have seen that as relevant to disclose?
Look, I can't speak for Jeff Sessions and what he recalled or what he didn't or what he thought was relevant and what he thought wasn't. What I'm suggesting here is I don't see anything serious here. And I think anybody that does or that thinks this somehow had some impact in the election is badly mistaken. And I'm happy to have that debate or argue with anybody. In terms of Russian activity or any country, believe me, every country in the world tries to influence elections. The President of the United States, President Obama, went to Britain and told them not to vote for Brexit or they'd go to the back of the line. Wasn't very effective, but it was certainly a blatant interference in a democratic country's elections. But I don't think it had any impact one way or the other. I would suggest the same thing's probably true here.
I appreciate your conclusions, Congressman. Hopefully we'll get the investigations to get the proof for them soon enough. Appreciate you being on the show as always.
Thanks for the invitation.
Always. Coming up in just minutes, Senator Al Franken is going to be here. How does he feel about this? What did he think of that answer? Where does he think it should go from here? We'd also like to note, just as we extended the information to Cole and all the other congressmen today, we extend it to the White House. Every day, once again, they've declined the request.